All right, so today we're on lesson 4 in your packet, which is page 29. We're skipping lesson 3, which is graphing rational expressions, so that we can kind of focus on how to simplify and do some of the operations first. So our learning target is I can simplify, multiply, and divide rational expressions. All right, so for this first video, I'm going to focus on just the simplifying, and then I'll do another video over the multiplying and the dividing. All right, so for example 1, and again, we are on page 29 in your packet. You're going to have to factor the numerator and the denominator. So if you look at this numerator, you have to think, what can you multiply to get negative 20 that adds together to give you a positive 1? And it would be positive 5 and negative 4. So the numerator would factor to be x plus 5 and x minus 4. And then we have to do the same thing for the denominator. All right, so for the denominator, you have difference of squares. So what can you multiply to get the 25? 5 and negative 5. So you would have x plus 5 and x minus 5. Now that we have factored both the numerator and the denominator, you're going to cancel out anything that can cancel out, but it has to be identical in the numerator and the denominator. So for this problem, the only thing that can cancel is the x plus 5 and the x plus 5, because it's the same thing in the numerator and it's the same thing in the denominator. So my simplified answer is x minus 4 over x minus 5. All right, and then an extraneous solution for this would be x cannot be positive 5. All right, now you're not going to have to answer questions about that, but I did want you to know the reason why it cannot be positive 5. The reason why it can't be positive 5 is because if I were to substitute 5 into this function, 5 minus 5 in the denominator would give me 0. And don't forget that you cannot divide by 0. That's considered undefined. So 5 would be considered an extraneous solution. So it could be anything, like anything would work here except for 5, because it would give us a 0 in the denominator. All right, so let's take a look at example 2. All right, so example 2, again, you have to factor. So the numerator, you would factor that with difference of squares. All right, so you would have x plus 6 and x minus 6. And then the denominator, 1 times negative 18 is negative 18. What can you multiply to get negative 18 that combines to give you a negative 3 that you need in the middle? So it would be a negative 6 and a positive 3. So I would have x minus 6 and x plus 3. And then I have to figure out, well, what cancels out? And so the only thing they have in common is the x minus 6 and the x minus 6. So that would simplify to x plus 6 over x plus 3. And if I asked you for the extraneous solution, then x could not equal a negative 3, because negative 3 would make my denominator 0. All right. So now moving on to example 3. All right. So with example 3, we have to factor the numerator. So 1 times negative 15 is negative 15. And we could multiply a positive 5 and a negative 3 to get that. And that would add together to give me the positive 2 that I need in the middle. So the numerator factors as x plus 5 and x minus 3. The denominator is another difference of squares. So that would be x plus 3 and x minus 3. So the x minus 3's cancel, all right, because they're the same in the numerator and the denominator. And that leaves me with x plus 5 over x plus 3. So that is my simplified answer. My extraneous solution would be -3. Because if I were to substitute -3 in the denominator, that would give me a 0 in the denominator, which is undefined. All right, so this is my simplified answer. This is just an extraneous solution if you were ever asked that. All right, number 4, the numerator, we can factor the numerator, but this time it's not the AC method and it's not difference of squares. It's actually a GCF. So I could factor out a 4 out of this numerator because 4 goes into both of those terms evenly. So if I divide out a 4 here, I'm left with a 1x. If I factor out a 4 here, I'm left with a positive 9. The denominator, what can you multiply to get 36 that adds together to give you 13? 6 and 6 gives you 12. 3 times 12 is 15, so that's not right. But let's see, 9 times 4 gives you 36, and that adds together to give you 13, and both of them are positive. So we would have an x plus 9 and an x plus 4. And so the x plus 9s would cancel, which leaves me with a 4 in the numerator and an x plus 4 in the denominator. Now, the 4's here cannot cancel, and that's because the denominator 4 is joined with an x. Okay, so those are not the same terms. So be careful. Don't cancel that out. Now, my extraneous solution would be -4 because that's the one thing that my denominator cannot be. All right, so on page 29, y'all try number 5 and 6, and then you'll actually take a picture of numbers 5 and 6, and you'll submit that to this assignment.